So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I made this fairly simple solid walnut sofa table. It's about 84 inches long, about 35 inches tall, and about 10 inches wide. This is going to be a pretty quick build because it was pretty easy to make, so it should only be about 2 parts. So this was the source material the customer sent me. You could see I have my dimensions on there. I also point out that I recommended they add an apron and a bottom stretcher to this. I know people take those off tables, but I rarely recommend doing that, especially for things that are skinny and tall like this. Just having connections at the top of the legs is going to be problematic. They agreed, so I went and bought my lumber. I tried out the sawmill that's closest to me that I could find so far, which is in Trenton. It's a little over a half an hour away, but they had really nice lumber there. And then the legs for this, I get legs on Rockler. I know going into this, the legs on Rockler are not always the best. I got 3 that were really nice and 1 that was a little problematic. But like I said, I know that at this point in woodworking, but they really are one of the cheaper, easiest ways to get rough leg material for working on stuff like this. So that was where I was going to start with this project. I'm starting with the legs, and these are 36 inch, I believe on Rockler they call them turning blanks. So I was subtracting the inch for the tabletop. I cut these down to rough size, and then I marked out my mortises. Now the top of this is going to have a haunch tenon, and then there will be tenons towards the bottom for the stretchers. So that's where all of my marks are. Now the haunches are going to be a little more time consuming to make, but I pretty much always use them at the top of legs like this because it gives you that solid tenon which will resist the twisting of the material, but it doesn't remove as much material at the top, which is prone to break out. So that means the haunch essentially is not going to go as deep as the tenon. I didn't have a lot of material to work with because the design of this, the legs are already so skinny to begin with. So I believe I made that haunch about a ½ inch deep. So that doing this, you basically are cutting your mortises twice, because I cut the whole mortise the ½ inch, and then I'll change the depth. You can see I have everything lined up. If you're buying legs like I'm buying legs that have some marring on them, I'm going to be tapering all 4 sides of these, which pretty much eliminate all of that. But a trick is to cheat all of the defects to the inside of the table because they're less likely to be seen there. So like I said, I had all those lined up. I had them lined up and oriented the way I wanted, and now I could go through and finish these mortises. So I changed my depth stop to go a little bit deeper. I only went a little over an inch into these because like I said, these are only about 2 inches wide. So at some point they would just meet in the middle anyway. And then you could see with the stop, I went through and created that beginning of the depth of the mortise. I left about a ½ inch up top for the haunch. Once I had that mark on all of them, I could remove that stop and just clear out the rest of the material to the bottom of the mortise. So that is basically what that looks like. Like I said, it's a little bit more work, but it's worth it. And you see how you have that extra material still left at the top, but it gives me a nice wide tenon. Looking at this picture, I guess they attached the top with just some screws, which would create such a wobbly table. I was happy this customer agreed with my recommendations to add the aprons and the stretchers. So like I said, this is also going to have a bottom stretcher. Now this will have a shelf down here, which is the original photo. Looks like they used the shelf to attach it, but that shelf is going to be solid wood and it's going to change with seasonal movement. So I left that. Actually, you'll see when I attach that how I dealt with that. So the main connection on the bottom here is going to be 2 horizontal stretchers and then 1 long width that will attach all the legs, give you a nice solid piece. So I kind of eyed where these markings were from the photo. I came up about 7 inches. I'm going to cut my mortises right in the middle. I calculated for the tabletop, and I always leave a little, like an 1/8 of an inch shoulder on both sides, just in case my marks don't line up. When I go to cut my tenons, if my mortises aren't perfect, the shoulder on the 10-inch will hide that. So that's why you could see I had 4 marks there with a little bit of 1/8 of an inch shoulder. Once I had those done, and those only went on the inside of the legs, not on the 2 top corners like the other. So like I said, these legs are getting tapered on all 4 sides, which is a little bit different design than I'm used to. I don't have a leg tapering jig, but I had this piece of melamine that I use for a flattening jig for my planer, and all I did was I screwed a 2x4 where I needed that taper. You can see I marked it on the top of the leg, and I just screwed this 2x4 to that melamine piece so I can ride all of my legs through. I also put these topside clamps to make this a little bit safer, and that was the plan, just to send all of my legs through the table saw. Now, because these are getting tapered on all 4 sides, I'm only going to be able to do 2 sides this way, and then you'll see how I adjust it to do the other 2. But this was really simple. I sent all of those pieces through, and you could see I could turn it once, reapply, and since I lost some material, I had a bunch of wedges, so I started using a wedge on the top of this in order to still make that a safe cut, and then I could send it through. So like I said, I did all 4 legs, 2 sides. I was able to do with my current setup. And that is basically what that looks like. You'll see how making this a full taper makes putting cutting the tenons for the aprons and the stretchers a little more difficult. It really made me realize why on a lot of tables the top 6 inches or so have no taper, and that's just so you have a flat surface to make your tenons. Now this one piece that was twisted, you could see it wasn't lining up perfectly. All I did was I was removing about 3/16 of an inch of the top of these, and then it tapered to no material being removed bottom. So if my leg didn't line up, you could see I had my mark. I just adjusted my fence, I moved it over so that that mark lined up. Like I said, these didn't all come perfectly square, so I made sure before I sent them all through, the mark of where the material needed to start lined up with the saw blade, and if it didn't, I adjusted it. Now once I had those 2 sides done, like I said, I couldn't do this anymore. The way I solved that problem without changing the jig was, because I removed that material on the top, it was riding closer to that fence, I just used a wedge at the top of this to push out that top, and then you can see I could finish my sides. So the other 2 sides I did this way. So that wedge is in place to kick out that material from where it was removed, and then I could just twist them and cut those out. So this was a pretty simple process. Having these little wedges, these are all cut-offs from other projects, was really convenient to have around the shop. I put a little piece of blue tape by that wedge to make sure it stayed in the same spot, and then I put blue tape on all the legs to make sure when I was twisting it, I was always cutting a different side. Now the taper on this is very subtle. It doesn't really show up on camera, but in real life, you could tell that the bottom of the legs were much thicker than the tops. Like I said, it was only about a 3/16 inch removed from the top, and it tapers down to not having anything removed from the bottom. You could also see that now my haunches are much smaller, which is also what I was looking for. Now the nice thing about this was it also kind of jointed the material at the same time. You could see the wedges removed were not flat, so it kind of squared up all of that material as well, because it was sitting on the bottom surface was flat. And then this is my set of legs. So once I had that done, I could just go through and start cutting all of the tenons. That will be in the second video, cutting the aprons and all that. You can kind of see I have that already done in the background there, but to kind of fill up the last little bit of this video and be able to make this in 2 parts, kind of jumped ahead, and this is making the 2 tops. So like I said, this was only 10 inches wide, so I was able to just glue 2 boards together to get the top. It's about 85 inches long. The nice thing about this lumber yard is their material is surfaced on 2 sides, but realistically this stuff was surfaced on almost 4 sides. One side was just a little rough. In my shop I don't have a lot of great tools for surfacing material, so it just makes my life so much easier that I can bring this stuff into the shop, pretty much work with it, clean up one side and work with it without having to do a bunch of surfacing to the materials. So I glued these up at the same time, so that center joint, you can see I'm only attaching the 2 pieces. It just saves time to glue it up this way. Those 4 boards are not connected. It's a set of 2 and 2. I could put all my panel clamps on and let this set up overnight. I could come back in the next day. And all I did for this, like I said, this material was really clean to work with. That usually means, it almost always means, you are spending more money to get it, but it saves on labor costs for the customers that I don't have to spend a half a day preparing it to be used. So the next day I could come in, like I said, I took the clamps off. You could see the edges. I used some C-clamps in order to keep everything square. And this stuff was pretty clean, like I keep saying. So I started at 80 grit and I sanded all the way to about 120 on both sides of this stuff. And then in the next video I'll start the legs.